Hi everyone, this is Ostillio speaking, together with Giulio Sciacca, and welcome to our presentation, Are the Groups of Conspiracy Theories Social Kinds? As you might have guessed, our presentation is about conspiracy theories, and in the recent years, these theories have become very, very popular, and because they offer simple explanations to very complex events, like for example, the recent elections in the United States, and also other problems, like for instance, the issue of immigration with the Great Replacement conspiracy theory. And in our definition, the groups of conspiracy theories are social groups, and we could use the taxonomy that was presented by Kathrine Ritchie. And in her taxonomy, she distinguishes between two kinds of groups mainly, and these are the type 1 groups that are structure instantiating groups. That means, like for instance, management boards or football teams, meaning groups where there is a division of roles. And then there are also type 2 groups, and these are groups where people are classified, are categorized in terms of their features. So for instance, you can divide people by ethnicity or by sexual orientation or anything like that. But then Ritchie, in her paper, also accounts for some groups that are in a sense undefinable in terms of types. And these are groups like mobs and queues of people in front of a shop. So in our view, it's quite interesting that we could consider the conspiracy theories to be either type 2 groups or this undefined type of group, or maybe both. Our general claim is that these groups of conspiracy theorists are social kinds. And in particular, we take social kinds to be a collection of phenomena defined by a property or a feature that is a social property or feature. And this is a definition provided by Asta in 2017. And our claim is about conspiracy theorist groups rather than their categories. So we're going to focus on what these groups represent as a social kind.
Now, since we claim that these conspiracy groups are social kinds, we start our analysis with considering three different minimal conditions for kindhood that we track down in the literature. According to the first condition, that we call the scientificity condition, kinds are those categories that are or could be relevant or important or significant enough to figure in our successful theories. Here, the idea is that any good theory of, in this case, the social world, must include these kinds and must theorize about these kinds. And what this condition also implies is that these kinds must figure in any scientifically complete taxonomy of the world. Now, the second condition we call explanatory relevance, and it is due to Hastas, according to which social kinds, since we are talking here about social kinds, play a useful role in explanation and play a causal role in the world. Now, as we can see, the first and the second condition are not perfectly identical. The first one, the useful role condition, is weaker than the causal role condition. We think that there are at least good reason to think that the first condition, the weaker condition, is satisfied in the case of conspiracy groups. We will see in a moment that there are some phenomena, some social phenomena, that seem to be explained by uneliminably mentioning these conspiracy groups. And the last minimal conditions that we are going to look at is the projectability condition, according to which kinds license inductive inferences, give rise to reliable predictions, warrant empirical generalizations, and feature in fruitful explanations. Here, the idea is that if conspiracy groups are really social kinds, then we should see again the same pattern that we see in other scientific kinds. So we have, in this case, social kinds, one or more classes of scientifically relevant properties that are associated with that kind, and the condition that if an instance of that kind satisfy a property in one or more of these classes, then we are granted that the vast majority of the instances of that kind will satisfy those properties as well. Now, we begin with the consideration on the scientificity conditions. What we want to point out here is that the groups of conspiracy theories are widely studied in the social sciences, and particularly they have been widely studied in the social sciences in the last, we'd say, 10 years. For example, there have been the influence work due to Ushinsky and Atkinson in political sciences that mainly highlight the consequences that these groups have on our democracy and more generally on our world. Then, as we know, there have been the influence work and the influence work due to Cass Sunstein that mainly popularized some of the psychological mechanisms grounding the membership to these kinds. Lastly, there have been a vast literature in social psychology, recently due to Douglas and Van Proyen, but many scientists contributed to this literature that mainly focused on pointing out the psychological properties, or even better, some classes of psychological properties that are generally associated to the members of these conspiracy groups. And so what we want to conclude here is that all these theories agree that a complete taxonomy of the social world must include the groups of conspiracy theorists. Now consider the experimental relevance. The idea here is that, as we can see in this short list of 4 phenomena, 4 social phenomena, the conspiracy groups should at least play a useful role in the explanation of these phenomena. Consider just the capitalist storming. It become clear in a few days that the storming of Capitol Hill was due mainly to groups of people that endorse some kind of the stolen election conspiracy theory. As we know, the members of these groups interacted on alt-tech platforms such as Telegram or Parler, and then they did what they did. Okay, so the idea is that we would like to claim that these groups play a causal role in the war, so that the Capitol storming was brought about by conspiracy groups, or mainly by conspiracy groups. But at least, since a causal claim is always a bit strong it's a bit difficult to defend, we would like to say at least that these groups play a useful role in the explanation of, for instance, the Capitol storming. Or also consider the loss of herd immunity against measles that happened in Europe when in 2019, where 4 different European countries lost their herd immunity against measles. One of the speakers of the World Organization said that this was due mainly to the spread of misinformation online. And as we know, the spread of misinformation online is ultimately due to conspiracy groups that invent, propagate, and investigate, in this case, anti-vax conspiracy theories. And so they contribute to the spreading of fake news that might influence other people. And these, we think, are 2 macro phenomena, if you like. But there are also minor social phenomena that should be explained also mentioning these conspiracy groups. Consider, for example, the setting on fire of vaccination hubs that happened in Italy, in Brescia, we think in April. It was brought about, this act was brought about by members of an anti-vax conspiracy group. And also, we may consider another minor social phenomenon, such as the setting of fire of internet antenna in different countries in Europe, for instance, in the United Kingdom and in the Netherlands. Again, the members of these groups did so because they were members of conspiracy groups. And so we think that when we want to really explain these facts, or better, why these facts happened, we should make an uneliminable reference to these conspiracy groups. Now, the third minimal condition for kindhood is the projectability condition. We think that there are at least a couple of classes of properties that are relevant here to consider the projectability on the members of these groups. The first class is a restricted class of psychological properties, and the second class It's a restricted class of epistemic properties. The point is that the properties in these classes are robustly instantiated by the members of the groups of conspiracy theories. Just start with the psychological properties. There are several studies in social psychology pointing out that conspiracy theorists recurrently feature what Ushinsky calls a toxic mix of psychological traits. Now, these two papers that we are quoting here are just review papers, but you can find tons of papers devoted to the analysis of these traits. These papers focuses on three different axes of psychological properties. For instance, as far as the personality axis is concerned, the members of conspiracy theories tend to have a strong tendency to distrust others, tend to reject social norms, tend to score high on the narcissistic traits of personality, and also tend to show high levels of anxiety. Also, these members usually have on this other axis, that is the axis of cognitive style, an intuitive versus analytic cognitive style. They tend to use many representative biases, such as the conjunction fallacy, and also they have an implicit cognitive style. They also, for instance, score badly on mathematical and probabilistic reasoning. The third axis is the worldview axis, and these members tend to have a couple of beliefs on the worldview. The first belief is that the world is a dangerous place, and the other worldview recurrently associated with members of these groups is that the world is just a competitive jungle that goes hand in hand with very strong tendency to distrust other people. So we want to claim that we claim that yes, these psychological properties are projectable among the members of these conspiracy groups. And so this is the first class of scientifically relevant properties that makes the case that conspiracy groups should be really considered to be social kinds. This is the second class of properties that are projectable among the members of conspiracy groups. This class is a class of epistemic properties, and particularly is a restricted class of epistemic properties, since it features properties such as believing that X and believing that Y, where X and Y are sentences partially constituting the conspiracy theory that we are interested in when we are considering a single conspiracy group. Now, although these properties are not scientifically relevant per se, what we take to be scientifically relevant are the mechanisms that are mainly psychological, grounding the fact that members of conspiracy groups keep believing into these sentences and very often end up believing all of those sentences constituting the conspiracy theory. Now we take those mechanisms that we're going to see in a moment to be homeostatic mechanisms and processes. This is a quasi-quote of a particularly relevant passage from one of the most relevant papers of Richard Boyle's, devoted on the concept of homeostatic property cluster kind. And he said that given a family F of properties that are contingently clustered in nature, there are underlying mechanisms or processes that tend to maintain the presence of the properties in F. Now, the family F of properties that we are thinking about here are the conspiracy beliefs, so the restricted class of properties that is associated with the conspiracy groups, with any conspiracy group. And the underlying mechanisms or processes that tend to maintain the presence of the properties in F are mainly psychological mechanisms. So the picture here is a picture according to which conspiracy groups are social kinds, since they satisfy the minimal conditions for kindhood. And among the projectable classes of properties, there is this restricted epistemic class of properties, whose single properties are conspiracy belief, and these conspiracy beliefs, the fact that these conspiracy beliefs are robustly co-instantiated by the members of conspiracy groups, is ensured by the fact that there are these underlying mechanisms or processes. And so the picture is such that it represents our conspiracy groups as homeostatic property cluster kinds, and particularly as homeostatic property cluster social kinds. Now, just this is a provisional list of some of the mechanism processes grounding the constitution of the restricted class of epistemic properties. And as we know, there are several mechanism processes that bind groups of conspiracy together, of conspiracy theories together, and these mechanisms ensure that the members of these groups maintain conspiracy beliefs, and also they end up believing all of those conspiracy beliefs, and also that these groups persist over time. Just think about very old conspiracy groups, such as the groups of people believing in the conspiracy theories on Kennedy's assassination. And of course, these mechanisms have been recently used as a theoretical framework for the explanation of many different phenomena, such as we have seen, the capitalist storming, where group polarization and information and reputational cascade, for instance, played a very relevant role. Of course, again, this list is provisional. There is more to add, but we think that these kinds of phenomena are pretty representative, and yes, they are prominent members of the kinds of psychological homeostatic mechanism processes that we have in mind. So to conclude, we have said, of course, conspiracy groups are part of the social reality, and of course, conspiracy groups are social groups in Ritchie's sense. And also, we think to have shown that these conspiracy groups satisfy the minimal conditions for being considered kinds. Also, there are psychological phenomena acting as homeostatic mechanism processes, which ensure the constantiation of epistemic properties amongst those belonging to groups of conspiracy theories. And to conclude, we want to say that the groups of conspiracy theorists are homeostatic property cluster kinds, and particularly we think to have shown that they should be considered to be homeostatic property cluster social kinds. And so, thank you for your time.